What is the weirdest, creepiest thing you've seen in a small town? Story 1. This was the creepiest moment I've encountered in my life. One road trip kick-started in Wisconsin, aiming to reach the Canadian Rockies. Heading westward, our route meandered through Montana, planning to head north near Calgary and then continue westward. Well-versed in camping, we had explored the terrains of South Dakota, Wyoming, and Colorado, often stopping in small rural cowboy towns along the way. But Montana, it caught us off guard. We had assumed Montana to resemble Wyoming. Few big cities, mostly rural ones, and vast stretches of emptiness in between. In our routine, we often stopped in these smaller towns, seeking inexpensive KOA campgrounds for an overnight stay before an early morning departure. Approaching the vicinity just west of Billings, we were preparing to stop for the night and head north near Glacier National Park before crossing into Canada. We stumbled upon a tiny town. I can't remember its name now because our stay was brief, but the population sign indicated around 200, give or take. There was a campground, a hotel, a lone gas station, and a solitary restaurant. As we filled up at the gas station in the early evening, roughly 5 p.m., no soul wandered the streets. We lingered, surveying the old buildings in the gas station's garage area. Suddenly, a movement caught our eyes through a window with half-open blinds. It appeared to be a child in the corner, bald-headed, who swiftly retreated when he realized we had spotted him. Though intending to step into the store area for some food and drinks, we decided to move on. It was creepy, reminding me of scenes from The Hills Have Eyes. The landscape and the creepy gas station were somehow familiar. With our tank full, we drove a couple of blocks and stopped at the sole restaurant in town. A dinky spot named Pat's Diner, which sported 2 cars in the parking lot and its open sign was hung. Given it was the only dining spot around and our hunger pressing, we went inside. As we approached, we could hear lots of people talking and laughing inside. It seemed like a nice place. What happened next was the most confusing and disturbing thing I've ever encountered. It felt like I walked into some B-horror movie. As soon as we opened the door and stepped inside, everyone in the whole place instantly stopped talking, moving, doing whatever they were doing. They turned around and stared at us. The place was packed. I figure there were probably 10 to 15 tables, but more than 50 people were in this place. We just stood there in silence for what seemed like hours, but was probably only 10 seconds. All of a sudden, this very old lady in the booth right in front of us slowly turned her head around, wearing 2 eye patches, and said in a creepy old voice, "What do you want here?" We all turned on our heels and practically sprinted back to the car, jumped in and sped away. We had no clue what the heck had just gone down. It felt like a crossover of No Country for Old Men and The Hills Have Eyes. It seemed like if we'd stuck around, something really bad would have gone down, like we'd end up as victims or furniture. We didn't stop until we were out of Montana, deep into Canada, where all we could see for days were bears and mountains. It was an awesome trip, but that freaky moment still gives me chills. I can't make sense of it. Welcome to the 80s horror county, where the nightmare of the uncanny greets you with its cold embrace. Story 2. I come from a small town in North Texas that was founded when the railroad came through but didn't have over 1,000 residents until the early 90s. Like most small Texas towns, we don't have a lot of old businesses. In general, small Texas towns are built around a square-shaped cross-section of roads that are lined with businesses surrounding the municipal or county courthouse. You can distinguish which towns are oil towns by looking at their squares. Their entire square consists of abandoned buildings that look like they were built in the 60s or 70s. This is pretty common. When I look at them, I get the sense of being surrounded by failed dreams. All these people were probably very optimistic when they built them, but they inevitably got disappointed when the oil boom was over. I can just imagine the timeline spanning from the giddy celebration and happiness when they opened to boarding up the windows in shameful defeat and filing for bankruptcy. This situation is sort of an allegory for the decay of small-town mom-and-pop businesses all over the country or even community self-sufficiency as a whole. Story 3. Where I live is so weird, like one big close-knit group. There are fewer than 500 people here. It's tiny. There are about 4 or 5 main last names, and almost half the kids in my high school have one of them. They're all connected somehow, claiming their family at reunions and funerals, but they deny when they date or marry. It's just odd. You're an outsider if you didn't go to high school here. The adults act like they're still in high school, sticking to their popular groups. No one seems to grow up. All the moms and middle-aged women in the town have almost the same dyed hairstyle and work similar healthcare admin jobs, wearing jeans from places like American Eagle. Those big names, they automatically come with a popular or accepted status because if you have one of those names, chances are you're already connected to everyone in town. It's shocking how much prejudice there can be even towards people from a neighboring county. My grandparents moved here only 30 years ago, and since nobody in my family ever married someone from this county, you'd think we were some sort of aliens with the way people look at us. My mom once shared a story about going to a book club where everyone introduced themselves. The first person stood up and said, "Hi, I'm person, and I'm person whose house they were in's sister." Then everyone else described themselves by their relation to that person, except for my mom. Whenever I hear politicians praising how great and accepting small towns are, it makes me want to vent my frustration. I really hope I get into college soon so I can leave this place behind and never look back. Story 4. Earlier today, I witnessed someone else's creepy moment. I live in a small town of only about 1,000 residents, where deer hunting season is currently underway. While driving home from my hunting trip, I passed by the local general store, where a typical deer season scenario was taking place. Several pickup trucks were in the parking lot, each with a deceased deer in the back being weighed in and hunters in camo and plaid milling about. I decided to stop and check it out. Just as I arrived, a vehicle with Canadian license plates pulled up behind me. The passengers seemed like tourists and quite out of place in this rural area. One of them got out of the car and headed into the store. The hunters and deer were probably already a bit overwhelming for them, but the creepy part was yet to come. During deer season, the owner of the general store takes Polaroid pictures of each hunter with their game and then displays them inside the store's front doors for everyone to see. As luck would have it, when the Canadian tourist opened the door to walk inside, a crowd of camouflaged hunters gathered around the pictures inside the store, looking at them. The tourist was met with a group of rednecks, all staring straight at him. He definitely looked bewildered and frightened. The Canadian guy got a taste of real country life. It sure let him feel like a deer in the headlights. Watch out for Story 7. The guy there witnessed something so messed up he had to leave real quick. Story 5. I was on location with the cast and crew. We stopped at a small town about an hour outside of Dublin for a meal and a drink. The only place open was a bar with a chalkboard sign advertising bar food. As we stepped inside, it was bustling, people engaged in lively conversations. However, as soon as they noticed us, their chatter ceased. They all turned to gaze blankly in our direction. Approximately 40 to 50 men and a woman behind the bar, all fixating their stares on us. When the director inquired about a table for dinner, the barmaid, holding a plate of steaming unidentified meat and chips, claimed they didn't serve food. It felt similar to that scene in American Werewolf in London, when they entered the Slaughtered Lamb pub and everyone falls silent, muttering, "You're not from around here." And then they resumed staring. Confused, we departed the place, only for 3 of them to approach the door, seemingly making sure that we left. So we drove off, quickly. Story 6. The creepiest thing I've seen. When I first started in music, I was on my debut tour driving from Phoenix, Arizona to Austin, Texas, a straight 18-hour drive. The unsettling part about Texas from Arizona is that after hitting El Paso, you're straight in the middle of nowhere for around 11 hours. We veered off Interstate 10 onto the 230, passing through an eerily small town. No cars, everything closed, no signs of life. We cruised for about 15 minutes and didn't spot a single car or person. Some stores had dim lights on and a sign read, "Happy Homecoming 2005" on a window, but it was actually 2008. We spent a few days in Austin, then retraced the same roads back to Phoenix. On the return trip, we passed the same town around noon on a Friday, and it was bustling with hundreds of people, bustling like a carnival. It felt incredibly uncomfortable. Around 2 weeks later, during a drive to Orlando, we stopped at Casadega, Florida, around 2 a.m. and had equally creepy experiences. Looks like they traveled to a village where people have a broken perception of time. Good thing they didn't stop to say hi, or they might have gotten stuck there. Forever. Story 7. Once I drove through a small town in Alabama and found myself in the middle of a Klan rally. Another time we stopped for gas in a tiny Tennessee town, just a gas station, a Denny's and farms. My friends and I stood out without camo. We glimpsed at their 3-page weekly newspaper. The front page photo featured a Clansman celebrating his birthday. I also witnessed a secret society distributing reading materials in front of a local church after Sunday services. There are parts of the southern US that seem stuck in the 60s. Story 8. The town's regular drinker had lost his license due to driving while hammered. The following week, he attempts to ride his lawnmower to the bar but gets stopped and fined on one of our main streets. You'd think that would stop him, but this guy's persistent. The next week, he's seen trying to ride one of the farmers' cows to the bar. It was the weirdest sight. Coming home to find a heavily hammered man draped over a cow, one trooper holding the cow while another wrote some kind of ticket. The cow seemed quite alarmed. Story 9. I was raised in Louisiana and often went fishing in secluded areas. You haven't experienced true backwoods until you've been in backwoods Louisiana. There are people who genuinely reside in the bayous, living in mud islands and traveling by boat everywhere. Some of them can be pretty scary and inhospitable. Their homes are incredibly run down, surpassing any level of white trash you can picture. They make those people from Deliverance seem like sophisticated jet setters. Story 10. In my hometown, we have a unique way to celebrate. Every 2 years on the first Thursday of the year, we created a 3 to 4 meter tall paper statue representing the devil. We light up its eyes, making it breathe fire, and for 7 days we dress up, drink, dance, chat with strangers, and enjoy loud traditional music. Finally, we burn the paper statue. The celebration takes place in Colombia. It might resemble Diabladas, as they do in Bolivia too. The large devil looks like this. We create a new one every 2 years. That one was made 6 to 8 years ago. It's not about anything satanic, it's more about our town's history and how the devil brought together diverse cultures, maintaining peace among different people. He's believed to send and troublesome individuals to hell, basically. Story 12. I live in a small town till I was in 6th grade, where a cult almost controlled everything. They bought all the properties using people's donations, and most houses were rented. Hardly anyone owned their home. I was one of the few who did. My best friend was kicked out for no apparent reason, which happened often, despite claiming to be Christian and was far from it. Yep, It was very creepy. Imagine living in a town where something just felt off, like someone was always watching you. You have to blend in or get out before something messed up happens. Curious about these tales from strange places around the world? Well, then join me on this journey and subscribe. Let's see how deep the rabbit hole really goes. Story 13. There was this kid I knew named Sandy. He watched the movie Warlock so many times that he thought drinking the fat of a boy would make him fly. He was in 7th grade when he lured a kid into the woods at a playground and hurt him. Later, they discovered a piece of fat boiling in a stove at home. That's the gist of it. Story 14. I'm from Denmark, and a couple of summers ago, my family and I visited California. It's an incredible place, but it seems like you need money to enjoy it fully. On our way home from Las Vegas to LA, we noticed a spot called Bombay Beach next to a man-made lake on the map. Intrigued, we decided to take a little detour. Upon arriving, we realized it was an abandoned town with not a soul in sight. My brother and I started discussing scary movies like Wrong Turn, and it got pretty creepy. Despite our concerns, my mom wanted to see the lake and ignored any rational thoughts as she left the car. We followed her to a small hill, but then we spotted a man near the water, carrying a big hunting knife downhill. None of us made a sound, but the man suddenly stood up and turned around. We all froze for a moment, then bolted to our car like we were late for class. Our hearts were racing, and my brother and I joked nervously about how no one would have found us if something had happened. My mom was quiet for most of the drive to LA. Yep, we went to Bombay Beach and scared ourselves into believing it could have been the end. Story 15. I moved from near Philadelphia to Georgia and started working at a catering facility. In my first week, we went to a small town book club where all the women were at least 90 years old. They seemed to believe that the South had won the Civil War. There were also 2 black servants who lived in a small house behind and served the women but weren't allowed to talk to them. On the way back, we passed by a strange lake where adults in old-fashioned white clothes were dunking a woman into the water and speaking in a strange way. It seemed like a creepy baptism. The person in charge, who grew up in Philadelphia, brought me to this event on purpose, knowing it would scare me. Story 16. There is a small town in Tennessee with a sign on its city limits saying, N-word. Do not let the sun set on you in this town. Surprisingly, the police treat it as if it's approved by the government. Another town has a festival to celebrate the of an elephant that caused chaos years ago. And then there's this guy who collects bowling balls from deceased people and arranges them in a pyramid in his front yard. He gathers custom-drilled bowling balls from deceased people, buying nearly 200 of them from garage sales. He looks extremely creepy. Don't ever make a wrong turn into this town. You'll never know if those hills have eyes that watch your every move. Story 17. There's a spot in Nevada near the Black Rock Desert called Gerlache. It's not much of a town, just a gas station and a few buildings. But right in the center stands a man-made tree entirely constructed from cattle skeletons. It's something straight out of nightmares. Known as the Bone Tree, it started as an art piece at Burning Man in 1999 and later appeared again in 2007. Eventually, it was moved to the Burning Man Work Ranch in Gerlache, the closest town to Burning Man. Story 18. While driving through South Island, New Zealand, I stumbled upon what I initially thought were a couple of huts and a petrol pump. It turned out to be a small town. I stopped for a sandwich and saw a girl riding on a pig, and there was even a gollywog store. It felt unsettling, so I decided to leave. It wasn't Gore, but I'd been there too. It's not a pleasant sight. Also, our coroner got replaced because he drove around town with one of the corpses he was meant to autopsy sitting in the front seat of his car. He just placed her there and took her for a ride. Story 19. Once I came across a town ruled by a cult. As soon as I got there, someone asked me for a donation. What stood out was their obsession with the color blue. Every house, even the trees, had a bluish hue. The cult members wore all blue, even blue masks. They seemed aggressive and damaged property like a bridge. Later, I heard the cult leader kidnapped a girl to use her supposed psychic powers as a priestess. They also found out the leader used to paint cars for a living. Quite bizarre. Story 20. I have a few for you here. In our town, there's a well-known puppeteer. Relatively speaking, and most shop owners have ordered puppets designed to look like themselves. As a result, our main street is adorned with somewhat eerie puppets displayed in every shop window. And I've got neighbors who frequently stroll around with their pet goat in a leash. Also sometimes, police place giant fake deer in fields along the roadside when it's not hunting season. Some folks drive by, spot the deer and think, wow, big catch, only to end up charged for hunting out of season. Not really creepy, but pretty strange. The cops would definitely know what you did last summer if you dared to harm those deer. Story 21. We took a wrong turn en route to Centralia, Pennsylvania, ending up on a gravel road that snaked up a wooded mountain. At the road's end sat a well-kept memorial for firefighters, but our attention shifted from the sign to a house nestled in the woods behind it. A small wooden cottage stood alone in the middle of nowhere. On the property, scattered through the trees in a wide area around the house, all sorts of eerie things hung from the branches, nailed to trunks or stuck on metal poles in the ground. It resembled something out of a nightmare. Old stuffed animals on display, faded plastic lawn sunflowers turned brown, hanging chairs, and painted wooden pigs wrapped to trees with duct tape and cords. We left in a hurry. Story 22. There's a graveyard close to where I live. There's this tombstone that catches my attention. It belongs to a guy named Buck, who was supposedly a judge during the witch hunts. Legend has it the one woman he sentenced cursed him before her death. During her execution, her leg fell out of the fire and rolled towards Buck. People say the mark on his tomb is her foot, and although they try to wash it off every few years, it keeps reappearing. Story 23. I grew up in a tiny town, and our high school was right by a highway where our parked trucks were easily seen by passing cars. Every year at the back-to-school assembly, our principal reminded us it was okay to have guns in our trucks for hunting, but urged us to hide them inside, so they weren't visible when state troopers passed by. He kept giving this speech even after 2002, way after Columbine. Once I saw a man doing something inappropriate with a goat. Later I found out his son was doing the same with a dog 3 years later. I once caught our town's only police officer in full uniform in a ballistic vest having a quick draw competition with himself in front of a mirror. We also had this really old guy in town who trained horses and dogs by singing to them. It seemed like magic to me as a kid. Story 24. In my town, there's this guy with a house crammed with all sorts of things. A bit of a hoarder, I suppose. He's got these creepy dolls in the living room, casually having a tea party. Outside, road signs and fabric posters plaster his yard and house. I heard he lives in one house and collects all this stuff from folks for the other. It's like an exhibition, so I don't quite know what to make of it, honestly. Story 25. I live in a former Soviet nation that's considered first world now. Why emphasize first world? Because most reminders of the Soviet era vanished, except for this colossal building in my small town. It's a sight to behold. When someone steps foot inside, the police swoop in and take them away. Similar structures have been demolished, but this one remains, boarded up and forbidden. I explored it once, luckily escaping the police. It was pitch black and seeing more than a few feet ahead was impossible. The main hall was a bit lighter, occupied by a horde of screeching pigeons. There's a cellar, too dark and filled with eerie noises. Stairs cluttered with intact 3-liter glass bottles. Surprisingly, no graffiti inside for a place like this, though the outside walls display some. Not even homeless folks reside here. Positioned by a lake, it looms ominously from a distance. One eerie experience inside was enough. It's earned the locals' nickname, the Ghost Castle. Not the most creative, I agree. It belongs to a wealthy recluse who won't demolish or finish it. It just stands there. Story 26. I once stopped at a liquor store in a small Colorado town with a population of not more than a few hundred people. When I asked the clerk if I could use the restroom, they pointed me to a door. As I went through the door, I found myself in an old Western saloon with life-size stuffed dummies dressed in Western wear placed everywhere. This was around 6 p.m., and I expected to see real people in there, but no one was around. The place gave me a creepy Deliverance vibe, so I quickly left. Don't make a wrong move in this town. Those dummies might go old Chief Woodenhead on you, and you might end up in the next Creepshow remake. You've just reached the end. I'm sure you're a true fan of haunted places, so I've got another one for you. Watch, have you ever found a place that shouldn't have existed? Story 5 will make your heart race. Don't miss it.